The vastness of space was quiet, almost too quiet. The Empire's fleet patrolled the edge of their territory, secure and confident in their power. It was just another day for them. Nothing unexpected, nothing out of the ordinary. Ships moved in perfect formation, officers at their posts, and everything ran like clockwork. But suddenly, something broke the silence. It started with a small blip on the radar, barely noticeable at first, like a glitch in the system. A single officer, Lieutenant Vorn, was the first to notice. He glanced at his screen and frowned. It was a strange signal, something that wasn't supposed to be there. At first, he thought it was a malfunction, a system error, but the signal didn't go away. It grew stronger, clearer, and then, without warning, it appeared. A ship. A warship. But not just any warship. This one was different, unlike anything the Empire had seen before. The officers in the command center turned their attention to the massive display screen. The image was blurry at first, like a shadow moving through space. The ship was enormous, its dark hull gleaming under the light of distant stars. It had a shape unlike any warship in the Empire's fleet, sleek, angular, with sharp edges and a terrifying presence. It didn't belong in the Empire's universe. There were no markings, no insignia. Just pure, raw power. Lieutenant Vorn quickly tapped on his console. This can't be right, he muttered under his breath. The ship was moving too fast, far beyond what the Empire's sensors could track. It appeared out of nowhere. No warning, no sign of it approaching. It was as though it had just appeared. Commander Tarak, a tall and stern leader, stepped forward. His eyes narrowed as he studied the display. "What is that?" he demanded. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of unease that everyone could hear. Where did it come from? No one had an answer. The ship moved toward them, its speed increasing with every passing moment. It didn't follow any known flight pattern. It didn't match the trajectories of any known ship. It was as if the laws of space and time were irrelevant to it. "Send out a communication request," Tarak ordered, his voice steady, but with a hint of tension. "Let's see if they respond." The officers scrambled to send a signal, but there was no response. They tried again and again, but the strange warship didn't answer. It didn't even slow down. "Do you think it's a threat?" asked Lieutenant Vorn, his voice barely above a whisper. Commander Tarak didn't respond right away. His mind raced, thinking of all the possible explanations. An unknown alien species, a rogue faction. But nothing fit. Nothing made sense. The ship continued to approach. "Raise the shields," Tarak barked. "Prepare for possible combat." The Empire's ships were powerful, their weapons capable of destroying entire fleets, but this ship, it didn't seem like anything the Empire had faced before. There was something wrong about it. It was too silent, too still, too perfect in its movement. It was as though it was waiting, watching, calculating every move the Empire made. The warship came closer. It was now within striking distance, but still no communication, no response. Just the silent approach of this unknown force. The officers in the command center exchanged worried looks. Some felt a cold shiver run down their spines. It was the feeling of facing something far beyond their understanding. Suddenly, the warship fired. A single pulse of energy shot from the ship, sending a shockwave through space. It was not a full blast, just a warning shot. The energy was unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. It tore through the vacuum of space, a bright, glowing pulse that sent ripples through the fabric of the universe itself. The warning shot missed the Empire's flagship by mere meters, but the power behind it was unmistakable. The Empire's ship rocked violently from the shockwave. Alarms blared as the hull creaked under the pressure. The crew stumbled, trying to regain their balance. "What was that?" Vorn gasped, his face pale. Commander Tarak's jaw tightened. He stared at the ship on the display screen, his mind racing. "It's a warning. They're not attacking. Yet." But the question lingered in the air. Why? "Recalibrate the sensors," Tarak ordered. track their movements, get more data. We need to understand what we're up against." As the Empire's officers scrambled to obey, one thing became clear. They were facing something they could not predict, something they could not control. The human warship had appeared out of nowhere, and now the Empire's command was frozen in uncertainty. The silence in the command center was deafening. All eyes were on the ship. What would happen next? The crew on the Empire's flagship sat in a tense silence, staring at the dark screen before them. The human warship had fired a single warning shot, just grazing their ship. But the silence that followed was thick with questions. What was that ship? Where did it come from? Why had it attacked so suddenly, with such precision? These questions filled the minds of everyone present. Commander Tarak stood at the front, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the ship's growing image on the display. He wasn't worried. At least he didn't want to appear worried. His reputation as a commander of the Empire's fleet had always been one of unshakable confidence. But inside, he felt a rare feeling creeping up: uncertainty. It was clear that the Empire had never encountered anything like this before. The human warship wasn't just advanced. It was something else, something that made every officer in the room uneasy. Every sensor, every calculation, told them the same thing. This was not just an ordinary ship. It was as if it had appeared from thin air. No warning, no ships detected in the vicinity. It was like it had been hiding in the shadows of space, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. The crew scrambled to try and make sense of it. Lieutenant Vorn, still at his console, was running scans again and again, each time hoping for a different result. But the ship's signature didn't match anything in their databases. No known species, no familiar markings, not even any familiar technologies. It was as if the ship belonged to a completely different universe. "Sir," the human warship. "It's still advancing," Vorn said, his voice strained. "It's not backing down. Our shields are holding, but the power behind that warning shot, it's unlike anything we've seen." Tarak nodded, not taking his eyes off the screen. The ship didn't seem to have any intention of retreating. It wasn't following any normal battle protocols. It didn't make any demands. It simply moved forward, closer and closer to the Empire's fleet. The lack of communication only made things worse. The Empire's fleet was used to negotiating, to gathering intelligence, to preparing for threats. But this was different. This ship, this presence, refused to be understood. "Sir, we've been unable to send any communication to them. They aren't responding," reported an officer from the communications panel. "What about our interference systems?" Tarak asked, turning to the operations officer. "They're in full effect, but it seems like the human ship's signal is immune," the officer replied, puzzled. "It's like nothing we've encountered before." The commander's mind raced. Could it be some kind of deception? A trap? "No, sir," said the officer. "This ship doesn't match the profile of any known enemy forces. If it's a trap, then it's unlike anything we've seen." The tension in the command room grew thicker. They were in unknown territory now. The human warship had crossed into the Empire's space without warning, and it wasn't showing any signs of aggression. At least, not yet. But there was something undeniably threatening about the way it moved through the stars, as though it was daring them to make a move. Tarak could feel his heart racing. His instincts told him that if they weren't careful, they might find themselves in a situation they could not control. But before he could voice his thoughts, a voice broke through the tension. A junior officer, nervous but with an expression of determination on his face, spoke up. "Sir, perhaps we're overthinking this. Maybe we should just reach out again. Try a different method of communication. There's got to be some way to get them to respond." Commander Tarak stared at the young officer, who looked about ready to risk everything on the hope of peaceful communication. Tarak understood the impulse, but his experience told him this wasn't just some simple misunderstanding. This was something far bigger, something far more dangerous. They were dealing with an unknown force, and unknown forces were never predictable. He turned to the officer, his voice calm but firm. "We can't afford to take any chances right now. Prepare our fleet for a defensive stance. All ships, move into a protective formation around the flagship. We need to show strength." The officer nodded, but the unease didn't disappear. In fact, it seemed to grow. The crew exchanged uncertain glances as they followed the commander's orders. They all understood the gravity of the situation. The human warship was not just a foreign ship, it was a challenge. And the Empire was not used to being challenged. Minutes passed, and still, the human warship closed in. Every officer in the command center remained on edge, their hands hovering over their consoles, ready for any sign of aggression. The ship had already shown that it could easily destroy them if it wanted to. Yet it hadn't. It hadn't done anything but make them question everything they thought they knew about warfare. Finally, Commander Terek spoke, his voice resolute despite the anxiety in his chest. "Prepare for the worst, but keep in mind, we are not the ones who chose this path. They'd brought this upon themselves." As the human warship grew closer, there was no more doubt. Whatever its intentions, it was now clear that the Empire would have to face it head-on. The question was, would they survive whatever this new force had in store for them? The atmosphere in the command center was thick with unease. The crew moved with a sense of urgency, but beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. The human warship continued its slow, deliberate approach, and with each passing minute, the feeling of being watched, of being measured, grew stronger. The Empire's command was used to being in control, to having the upper hand. But now, for the first time in a long while, they felt powerless. Commander Terek stood at the front, staring at the screen. His eyes were narrowed, his mind running through every possible strategy, every possible outcome. Nothing seemed right. The human ship wasn't acting like any enemy they had encountered before. It wasn't attacking, but it wasn't retreating either. It was simply there, silent, yet undeniable in its presence. "Have you been able to get a response yet?" Terek asked, his voice low but carrying an edge of frustration. Lieutenant Thorne, sitting at his console, shook his head. "No, sir. We've tried every method of communication. Nothing is getting through." Terek exhaled slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the table in front of him. He knew they couldn't continue this way. They needed information. They needed to understand what this ship wanted before it was too late. "Are we tracking its movement?" Terek asked, turning to the officer in charge of the sensors. The officer glanced at his screen, frowning. "Yes, sir. It's still heading straight for us. At its current speed, it'll be within range in a few minutes. But it's not making any other moves. No weapons activation, no sign of hostile intent." The lack of aggression only added to the unease. The Empire had faced countless threats, but every enemy they'd encountered had made their intentions clear. This human warship, on the other hand, was different. Its approach was calm, calculated. It wasn't trying to destroy them. It was simply waiting. "But why?" "We can't just sit here doing nothing," said one of the junior officers, his voice trembling. "Shouldn't we take action? Show them we're ready." Terek turned to him, his expression stern but not unkind. "We need to be patient. Acting out of fear will only make things worse. Right now, we don't know what we're dealing with. The last thing we need is to provoke them." "But what if they've already made their decision?" The officer pressed. "What if they're waiting for us to make the first move?" Terek's gaze softened just a fraction. The officer had a point, and that made the situation even more dangerous. If the human warship had already decided to confront them, then hesitation might cost them everything. But they had no way of knowing if that was the case. All they had was uncertainty, and in the face of the unknown, hesitation was the only thing keeping them alive. "We wait," Terek said firmly. "We wait until we have more information, until we know what they want." There was a long pause, the silence hanging in the room like a heavy weight. Everyone could feel the pressure, but no one dared to speak. The human ship was getting closer, and every officer knew that. At any moment, something could change. They didn't know what would happen next, but they all felt that the moment of decision was drawing near. Then suddenly, the calm was broken by a soft beep from one of the consoles. A message had appeared on the screen. "Commander," Lieutenant Vorn called, his voice tight with surprise. I think it's a transmission from the human ship." For a moment, no one moved. The thought of direct communication with the unknown ship sent a wave of nervous energy through the room. What would they say? What did it mean? Tarek's heart quickened. He knew this was the moment. This was the first real chance to understand what was going on. "Put it on the screen," Tarek ordered. Vorn quickly complied, and a new image appeared on the large display in front of them. The image was distorted at first, the transmission unclear. But then, as the signal steadied, a single, simple message appeared in bold letters across the screen. "We are humans. Prepare yourselves." The message was brief, but it was enough to send a chill down the spines of everyone present. "We are humans." Those words, simple as they were, carried a weight that none of them could fully understand. Prepare yourselves. What did that mean? Was it a threat? A warning? The lack of any clear intent only made the message more confusing. For several moments, no one spoke. The entire command center was frozen, caught between the fear of the unknown and the need to respond. Tarek's mind raced. He had expected many things, but this was not one of them. He had expected to see an attack, a demand, or even a show of force. But instead, they had received a calm statement, one that raised even more questions than it answered. The silence stretched on, each officer staring at the message in disbelief. Finally, Tarek broke the stillness. "This changes everything," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He turned to the communications officer. "Send a response. Let them know we're ready to talk, but we will not be intimidated." The officer nodded, quickly sending a message back. But even as the words left their ship, Tarek couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened next was no longer in their control. They were no longer just dealing with a ship. They were facing something much bigger, a force that, despite its calm exterior, had the power to change everything. And as the human warship drew closer, it became clear that the Empire's grip on the situation was slipping further and further away. As the hours passed, the Empire's fleet remained locked in place, hovering in the vast emptiness of space. The human warship continued to approach slowly, but it hadn't made another move since its brief communication. The tension in the command center was unbearable. Officers whispered among themselves, but no one dared to voice their true thoughts aloud. The message from the human ship still hung heavily in the air. "We are humans. Prepare yourselves." Commander Tarek stood at the front, his gaze fixed on the dark silhouette of the ship approaching them. It was unsettling. The human warship moved with a calm confidence, as though it had all the time in the universe. But the longer it hovered near the fleet, the more the crew felt like prey caught in a web, waiting for the inevitable. For a moment, it almost felt like nothing would happen. No more messages, no more threats. The stillness was deafening. Then, without warning, the human warship fired again. This time, the shot was different. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a message. It was a pulse of energy that rippled across the fabric of space, sending shockwaves through the very core of the Empire's fleet. The blast didn't hit any ships directly, but the power behind it was unmistakable. It was like the ship was showing them something, a demonstration, a quiet reminder that it could destroy them at any time. "Shield status." Commander Tarek barked. "We're holding steady, sir," replied the officer monitoring their defenses. "The blast didn't damage us directly, but it's rattled our systems. We're losing a few connections across the fleet." Tarek clenched his jaw. They had to act fast before they lost their advantage. He couldn't help but feel like this was a game of patience being played by the human warship. But what was the goal? What did they want? They hadn't made any hostile moves, but that pulse of energy proved they had the power to do so if they wished. "Continue to monitor their movements," he ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Get me a clearer picture of their capabilities." Lieutenant Vorn immediately set to work, inputting commands into his console. The human warship's movements were unlike any they had seen before. It seemed to glide effortlessly through space, almost as if it was part of it, moving with a precision and grace that defied the laws of physics the Empire had always relied on. The sensors had a hard time tracking it, as though the ship was somehow disrupting their systems. "This is unlike anything we've ever seen," Vorn said, almost in disbelief. "The energy readings. It's like the ship is manipulating space itself." Commander Terek turned his attention to the screen. He could see it now, the way the human warship seemed to bend the fabric of space, as though it was weaving in and out of the very threads that held the universe together. It was an unsettling sight. The Empire's fleet had relied on its technology for so long, believing it was invincible. But now, they were faced with something that defied explanation. "We have to find a way to communicate," Terek said firmly. He was trying to stay calm, but it was becoming more and more difficult. "Send another message. Tell them we want to understand. We need to know what they want from us." His voice was steady, but his mind raced. What did these humans want? The words from their previous message still echoed in his mind. "Prepare yourselves." It wasn't an invitation to talk. It wasn't a threat. It was more like a statement of fact, a warning without any clear action behind it. But the question remained, why hadn't they attacked? Why hadn't they taken the opportunity to strike when they had the chance? "We've sent it, sir," the officer confirmed, "but I'm not sure what good it will do. They haven't responded to anything so far." Terek nodded, his face grim. "We wait." It felt like hours passed as they waited, each passing minute heavier than the last. The human warship moved ever closer, and yet it didn't seem to be in a hurry. There was no urgency in its movements, no sign that it was going to escalate the situation. It was as if the ship was simply observing them, like an all-knowing presence, watching their every move, judging their every decision. Finally, just as the tension seemed unbearable, the communication panel beeped again. This time, the message appeared on the screen before anyone could react. It was brief, but it carried a weight that none of them could ignore. "We understand your hesitation," the message read, "but we are not your enemy. We only seek to understand." The words sent a shock through the command center. Not their enemy, but they had already shown their power. They had already made it clear that they could destroy the Empire's fleet if they wished. And yet, here they were, claiming they didn't want to fight. Commander Terek stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. If they didn't want to fight, why had they demonstrated their power so openly? Why had they shown just enough force to keep the Empire on edge without ever truly threatening them? It was a careful game, one that seemed designed to make them question everything they knew. "We must be careful," Terek finally said, his voice low. "They are playing with us, testing us, but we cannot afford to make a mistake." He turned to the officer in charge of the fleet's coordination. "Prepare the ships for a potential negotiation. Let's show them we are willing to communicate, but make sure we're ready for anything." The officer nodded, quickly relaying the order. As the minutes passed, the human warship loomed closer. The uncertainty in the room grew with every second. What would happen next? Was this really a sign of peace, or was it simply another step in a far larger game? One thing was clear: the Empire was no longer in control of the situation. The human warship had changed everything. And now, the Empire had to decide how to respond. Would they fight? Would they try to negotiate? Or would they simply wait, as the humans had been doing? The hours dragged on, and the crew aboard the Empire's flagship couldn't shake the feeling that they were at the edge of something far greater than anything they had ever faced before. The human warship had been silent for the last several minutes, hovering ominously at the edge of their fleet. Its lack of action had everyone on edge. Some officers stared at the screens, hoping for some clue, some signal that would help them understand what was going on. Others whispered to each other, wondering aloud what the humans truly wanted. Commander Tarak remained at the front of the room, his gaze unwavering as he watched the human ship. The words from their last message repeated in his mind. "We are not your enemy. We only seek to understand." The phrase was simple, but its meaning was anything but clear. If they weren't enemies, then what were they? Why had they come here, to the heart of the Empire's territory? And what did they expect from this encounter? It was the calm before the storm, a strange, oppressive silence that hung heavily over the command center. Tarak could feel it in the pit of his stomach, an unsettling sense that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. He looked over at Lieutenant Vorn, who was still glued to his console. The young officer's face was tense, his brow furrowed as he scrolled through endless data. It was clear he was searching for something, anything that would give them insight into the human warship's intentions. But so far, nothing had given them any concrete answers. "Anything?" Tarak asked, his voice quiet, almost resigned. Vorn looked up, his eyes tired but sharp. "No, sir. I've run every possible scan, but the ship doesn't match anything in our databases. There's no identifiable communication signature, no weapon systems that we recognize. It's like it doesn't even belong in this universe." Tarak's hands tightened on the edge of the table. They had known for a while now that the human warship wasn't like anything they had ever encountered, but hearing those words again made it all the more real. The Empire's vast fleet, its centuries of military dominance, all of it seemed to be meaningless in the face of this unknown ship. "How long until they reach our fleet?" Tarak asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "At its current pace, we estimate about 15 minutes, sir," Vorn replied. "But with their strange ability to manipulate space, it could be much sooner or much later. We just can't predict their movements." Tarak took a deep breath. Every instinct in his body screamed for action, for something to break the silence, to take control of the situation. But something held him back. Something about the human warship's stillness made him hesitate. Just then, the communications officer spoke up. "Commander, we've received a new transmission. It's from the human ship." The room went still. All eyes turned to the screen, which flickered as the message began to appear. "We understand your confusion." The message began, its words slowly forming across the screen. "You are used to being the masters of this space, but there are forces in the universe that are greater than all of us, forces that have existed long before your empire rose. We are not here to destroy you. We are here to learn, to show you a different way." The message lingered on the screen, the words heavy in the air. It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't exactly an invitation either. It was as if the humans were trying to explain something that was too vast for them to fully comprehend, something beyond their reach. Tarak's mind raced. The words didn't make sense. A different way. What did that mean? And who were they to claim knowledge of forces beyond the Empire's reach? What are they trying to tell us? Tarak muttered under his breath. "I'm not sure, sir," Vorn replied, looking equally baffled. "But it sounds like they're offering us some kind of opportunity, maybe even guidance." The thought made Tarak uneasy. The Empire had always prided itself on its strength, its control over the galaxy. It had never been interested in other ways of doing things. The idea of learning from someone else, especially someone who appeared out of nowhere, was unsettling. But deep down, he knew this was no ordinary encounter. This wasn't just a battle for territory or resources. It was something more. "Their technology is unlike anything we've seen," Vorn continued, his voice low. "It's possible they've discovered something that could change everything we know about the universe. But at the same time, we don't know if we can trust them." Commander Tarak turned back to the screen. The human ship loomed ever closer, but this time, something had changed. There was no longer a sense of imminent danger. Instead, there was something else, a strange, compelling curiosity. The silence stretched on, and then another message appeared on the screen. This one was different. It was a simple image, a representation of a vast, swirling energy, unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. The colors were bright and vibrant, yet there was something serene about it, as if it was more of an invitation than a warning. "We offer this to you," the message said. "Take it, and you may begin to understand." Tarak stared at the image, the sense of mystery deepening. What was this energy? What could it do? What would it mean for the Empire to embrace it, or to reject it? The decision weighed heavily on him. The fate of the entire Empire might rest on this choice, on how they responded to this unknown force. What would happen if they accepted the humans' offer? Could they trust it? Or was this some sort of manipulation, a trick to lure them into something far worse? "We can't make this decision alone," Tarak said quietly. "Bring me the council. We need to discuss this carefully." As the officers began to prepare for the council meeting, the tension in the room was replaced by a new feeling, one of uncertainty and apprehension. For the first time, the future of the Empire seemed uncertain, hanging on the balance of a decision that none of them were fully prepared to make. The human warship continued to approach, its message clear: "We are not your enemy. We only seek to understand." But with every passing moment, it was becoming clearer that the decision they were about to make would determine not just the fate of their fleet, but of the Empire itself. As the minutes passed, the tension in the command center reached a fever pitch. The room was filled with whispers of speculation, nervous glances exchanged between officers, and the sound of fingers tapping against consoles, all searching for answers that didn't seem to exist. The council had assembled, and the weight of the decision that lay ahead was heavy on everyone's mind. Commander Tarak stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped in front of him, as he surveyed the faces of his senior officers. The decision they were about to make would change the course of the Empire's future. On one hand, there was the undeniable power of their fleet, their centuries of dominance in the galaxy. On the other, there was the human warship, mysterious, powerful, and offering something they had never even considered: an opportunity to understand forces beyond their comprehension. "We're being asked to take a step into the unknown," Tarak began, his voice calm but firm. "The human warship has demonstrated power unlike anything we've ever faced, but they claim they are not here to harm us. They want to teach us, to show us a different way." His words hung in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. It was almost as though they were all waiting for someone to say something that would break the silence, something that would provide a clear answer to the complex questions they faced. Finally, Admiral Cora, an officer with decades of experience, spoke. "We've never backed down from a fight. We've never let fear rule our decisions. This human warship is an unknown, but we cannot let them think we are weak. If we allow them to manipulate us, to convince us that they have something we don't, it will undermine everything we'd fought for." There was a murmur of agreement around the table, but Tarak could see the doubt in their eyes. Cora's words were powerful, but they were also steeped in pride. Pride in their strength, their control. And while Tarak knew the value of strength, he also knew that sometimes it was wiser to recognize when things were beyond their understanding. "I understand your concerns, Admiral," Tarak replied, his voice steady. "But we're not just facing a battle of strength here. If we continue down this path, we may find ourselves fighting something we don't even comprehend. The human warship hasn't attacked us. It's shown us only glimpses of its power, and it's given us the chance to communicate. This is not just about fighting. It's about learning, adapting. We can't afford to be blinded by pride." The room fell silent again as the officers considered his words. The message the humans had sent was clear: "We are not your enemy. We only seek to understand." But what did that really mean? Was this an invitation to peace, or was it a carefully orchestrated move in a much larger game? What was at stake here, and who truly held the power? Lieutenant Vorn, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Commander, if we refuse their offer, we risk making an enemy of them, an enemy with power far beyond our own. But if we accept, we risk losing everything we've worked for. Our fleet, our empire, it all could change. We could be giving up our place in the galaxy to something we don't even understand. Terok nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling on him like a heavy mantle. He had spent his entire life in the Empire, had devoted every ounce of his strength to its cause. And now, here he was, faced with a choice that could redefine everything. "We can't rush into this," Terok said, looking around the table. "We need more information, more time. The human warship is still at a distance. We have a window to act. We can send a message, but we must be cautious." Admiral Korak crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "We've already sent messages. They haven't responded in a way we can trust. If they truly wanted peace, they would have shown us more than just vague words. We need action." Terok raised his hand, silencing the room. "We've seen action from them, Admiral. The energy pulses, the demonstrations of power. But those actions haven't been threats. They've been tests. They want to see how we respond. This is not an enemy that charges in. This is an enemy that watches, that evaluates." The silence in the room was deafening. Terok's words hung in the air, stirring a mix of fear and curiosity in the officers around him. The idea that the human warship wasn't acting out of malice, but out of some form of calculation, was both unsettling and intriguing. What did it mean to be on the receiving end of such careful scrutiny? And what would it mean for the Empire if they were judged and found wanting? "Commander," Lieutenant Vorn said, his voice hesitant but determined, "perhaps it's time to consider what this all really means. If they can offer us knowledge, understanding, things beyond what we've ever known, shouldn't we at least be open to the possibility? We've built our empire on conquest, on control. But what if there's more? What if there's something greater out there, something we can't see because we're too focused on maintaining our dominance?" Terok turned to Vorn, his eyes narrowing as he considered the words. The young officer's suggestion struck a chord deep within him. The Empire had never been about exploration or learning. It had been about power. But the galaxy was vast, and there were always forces at play that even the mightiest empire couldn't control. What if this human warship was just the beginning? What if there was more to the universe than they had ever imagined? "We're not going to make a decision based on fear," Terok said slowly, looking each officer in the eye. "But we also won't make it out of arrogance. The human warship has given us a choice, a chance to see beyond our current limits. The question is, are we ready to take it?" The room was still. Each officer seemed to be weighing the enormity of the decision. The humans weren't enemies in the traditional sense. They weren't attacking or demanding anything. But they weren't friends either. They were offering something new, something unknown. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The seconds stretched on, each one more crucial than the last. The Empire's future hung in the balance. Would they choose the familiar, the safe, and the known? Or would they take a leap of faith into the unknown, embracing the possibility of something greater? Finally, Commander Terok broke the silence. "Send a message. We'll listen. But we will not surrender control. We will negotiate on our terms." As the message was sent, a collective breath seemed to be held across the command center. They had made their choice. Now, it was up to the human warship to respond.